I used that alley because it made me feel clever. 7 minutes shaved off a commute isn't much, but when you work nights and sleep like a badly tuned radio, 7 minutes is a small victory you can pocket and touch with your thumb when the rest of the day misbehaves. It wasn't a picturesque sort of passage, not the kind with fairy lights and flower baskets that make Instagram forgive you. This was a practical slit between a Polish bakery and a print shop that had died some years before I moved to the neighborhood. The walls were misaligned brick, the mortar combed in resentful lines, and the air had a permanent aftertaste of yeast and wet paper. I knew its shape better than I knew the steps in my own flat. 12, maybe 15 paces, depending on where your feet landed. 8 to a rust-colored stain that looked like an inland sea, and then the last short run to daylight. The print shop, as light well halfway down, hissed a faint damp into the alley in winter, and a warm glue stink in summer. That was the alley I knew. That was the alley I used, until one morning I stepped into it and felt like I had put my foot wrong on a staircase I'd climbed 1,000 times. It was the bakery van that set me off balance first. They always parked on the left in the mornings, tail to the curb, a little crooked. That day it was on the opposite side with the lift gate down, boxes stacked like a stage set. It meant nothing, I told myself, except that my mind likes furniture kept where it belongs. I stepped into the alley with the stale confidence of habit, counted out my pace numbers, like a child touching spindles on a banister, felt the familiar refrigerator breath cold that always hung there, and by the time I reached 15, I hadn't reached the stain. The walls were the same at a glance, brick like old bread left out too long, but the space had elongated itself with a casual arrogance. And there were doors now, 4 of them on the right wall. Not real doors, not for people, unless you were a child or a very patient contortionist. Waist-high rectangles painted the kind of municipal green that wants to be comforting and ends up feeling hygienic. Each had a small brass number screwed into the upper right corner, like a discrete nameplate. 1, 3, 5, 7, odd numbers only, shining dully in the light that didn't quite reach them. I stopped. In London, stopping in a narrow cut is the social equivalent of dropping a glass in a quiet pub. Even if nobody says anything, you feel the accusation. No one was behind me. The air had the thick hush of early hours, when the city has done its throat clearing and is waiting to speak. I reached out without much permission from my better judgment and touched the 5. The metal was warm, not sun warm. The alley never got proper sun. Breathing warm, like someone on the other side had leaned close and fogged the number with their mouth. I kept moving because that is what you do when your brain is trying to reorganize the world without letting panic know it has been invited. At 23, I reached the stain that wasn't a stain anymore. Up close, it was a patch, a square of concrete flush with the rest, edges too clean, the color a shade off. It looked like a lid. The patch had always been there, I told myself. I had simply decided it was a spill, because stories are easier than lids. I walked the rest of the way out, my breath visible even though it wasn't that cold, and stood blinking in a familiar daylight that felt like it had been rearranged in my absence. You can talk yourself out of a lot, especially if you've lived in a city long enough to know that things are always being replaced while pretending not to be. On my break, I looked at satellite view and saw only a thin, dark seam between rooftops. Nothing labeled, nothing secret. From above, the world forgives itself everything. That night after my bar shift, I took the alley again, because avoiding a thing admits more than confronting it. The city was in its 11:30 voice, emptier, the buses like tired whales, conversations thinner and more sincere as they passed you by. The alley's mouth yawned, black as a deep breath in. I stepped inside and felt rain stop on my shoulders, as if I'd gone under a narrow canopy. The dryness was abrupt and total. It made my footsteps slap a fraction louder. The doors had moved. They were on the left now. 4 of them, numbered 2, 4, 6, 8. Same paint, same brass. I walked past 2 with an exaggerated casualness I didn't believe in. Halfway down, I heard footsteps behind me, late footsteps echoing the rhythm I'd already made. I turned and saw only the alley's mouth, a postcard cut out of the street beyond, damp and ordinary. The echo arrived as if from under the floor, a beat behind mine, like footsteps learning. The patch was warm under my palm, not heat, like from a working radiator, the heat of moving air. I put my ear to it, because fear prefers curiosity to be busy. Under the concrete was the softest impression of pressure, the seashell suggestion of space. A dampened thud, another, spaced as if someone were walking and counting. When I lifted my head, my cheek was lined with fine cement dust, like sleep grit. I walked the last 6 paces too fast and came out to the bakery, S-light, with my chest doing the small panics it does when you sprint after pretending you weren't going to. In bed, the ceiling's cracks arranged themselves into a map that refused to remind me of anything. I slept the way you sleep after a fall where you didn't hurt yourself. Shallow, chastened, competitive with your own pulse. Morning put the alley back where it belonged. 12 paces, no doors. The rust sea-stained back to its familiar continent. The bakery men in their white paperies arguing about a fixture pile. I touched the wall where 5 had been and felt the kind of cold that asserts itself without wanting to be dramatic. I told myself I'd dreamt the rest. I had been awake 20 hours, the rain, the echo of a bar, the usual. The city equips you with explanations like spare tissues. It rained that night, and the rain stopped in the alley's mouth again, as if a film had been stretched across it by someone with neat hands. The doors were back. 8 this time, 4 to a side. Numbers 1 to 8, evenly spaced. Brass bright, as if someone had just exhaled on them and polished with the cuff of a sleeve. I passed 1 and 2, and stopped at 3 because someone had dragged 4 fingers down the paint, smearing lines that dried darker. 4 lines. No thumb, no ring finger. I held my hand up beside it in disbelief at my own stupidity, and found my spacing matched too well. At 5, the smell of printer as ink rose in a small sour breath and sat on my tongue. At 7, the floor warmed through the soles of my shoes, and the patch radiated like a living thing. Under my ear, knock. 3 slow, a pause. 1 hard, impatient, a pause. 2 slow and deliberate, as if performed for an audience that needed to be taught the beat. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. The space under the alley had learned a rhythm and wanted me to know it had learned me too. I spoke into the concrete, because that's what you do when you've been put at a window and can to see what you are supposed to. Hello, I said, and hated the smallness of it. My voice came back late, thinner, like a recording of me rather than the thing itself. I got up carefully and walked away without running, the way you back out of a room where someone is sleeping, and you aren't sure if they want to be woken. The pattern tapped itself into my day in ways that made me want to apologize to surfaces. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. kettle, counter, steering wheel at a red light. I bought a cheap door chime at the pound shop, the sort that bleats when the magnet moves away, and stuck it to the brick where 3 had been during daylight. I pressed until the glue's mind changed. Nobody asked what I was doing because London gives oddness a wide berth unless it wants something from it. I chalked a line at shoulder height at the alley mouth, and another 5 strides in. At the patch I made a crude cross, and under a loose mortar wedge near where 5 usually sat. At night, I slipped a folded note. I can hear you. The chime laughed once as I approached in the dark, a thin, embarrassed beep that died quickly, like a goldfish memory. My chalk marks had been dragged downwards by something careless with fingers. The cross had moved 3 paces farther in and sharpened, cut rather than drawn. The doors had traded paint for wood, dark, oiled, as if their grain had been fed. The brass numbers stayed bright without help from any light I could find. The smell of old wiring breathed through 4. At 6, the heat climbed my ankles. I pressed my ear to the patch at 7, and the knocks rose up louder, not as if the thing beneath wanted out, but as if it wanted me to trust that it knew I was there. "What do you want?" I asked the ground. A soft push of air rose through the seam and touched my cheek, warm and somehow careful, printer's ink and something like old paste. A breath leaned back against the other side of 4, close enough that you can hear the weight of a forehead change the sound of a room. I didn't knock back. I didn't open anything. I went home and barricaded a door in a building with controlled entry, like the sort of person who believes furniture will stop a story. I did the long way round for 3 nights. It added 11 minutes, which I spent being stubborn and watching my own reflection in dark shop windows to see if it knew something I had missed. On the 4th night, my feet took me to 𝗧𝗛𝗓𝗦𝗡 without asking my vote. The alley had no doors. The patch was a stain again. The walls looked sandblasted, the mortar clean in a way that is a little obscene on old brick. I put my palm where 5 had been, and felt a seam where there should have been none, a faint ridge like a scar that had decided to appear. A man stood under the bakery spill of light with a cigarette cupped from the drizzle. He was one of those faces that look like the younger picture of someone you know. Same jaw, softness, but back around the eyes. He watched me look at nothing and said, "Shortcut's closed." "Since when?" I asked. He tilted his head. "Depends what you mean." He tapped ash into a puddle and then, politely, put the butt in his jacket pocket. "They bricked it years ago. Council and a priest, if you believe the lad at the off-license. A boy went in and couldn't be got out. You know how it is with places that teach you about doors." "There's no brick," I said, because the alley was right there, pretending to be itself. He knocked the wall near the mouth. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. The sound came back a fraction late. Not echo, not trick, but an answer that had run to catch up. He lifted his shoulders like apologizing to a friend for leaving a party early. "If you're going to talk to it," he said, "talk properly." Then he walked off in a direction the street didn't have, like he had unfolded a fold that wasn't available to the rest of us. At home, I wrote the pattern on a receipt and felt ridiculous and relieved in equal measures. The chime ID stuck to the wall was on my welcome mat when I opened my door, the magnet placed beside it like a neat note. Someone had ticked a tiny one into the plastic with blue ink. I stared at it long enough that my tea went cold. I thought of calling the police and asked myself what I would ask them to come and arrest. A rhythm, a seam, a door I had wanted to be allowed not to open. I tried to tell Jenny at the bar in the half-minute lull after a customer asks for a martini that will never taste like the one they had at a wedding. "You know the alley by the bakery?" I said, and she shook her head before I could finish in the universal sign, for we are not going to enjoy the same story. "There isn't one," she said. "There was before I moved here. They bricked it. Boy went missing. Old story. Don't go looking. You'll find it." Then she laughed to put the conversation back in a place where friends live. And I laughed too, because you're not allowed to hold a silence like that while someone else is counting change. After close, rain fell in the short, decisive way that makes the air smell cling film. I bought 2 coffees from the kiosk that decides to be generous at midnight and left one at the alley mouth on the dry side of the line where wet stops. It was a stupid gesture, but London respects stupid gestures when they are polite. In the morning, the cup was gone. In its place, my folded note, smoothed flat and weighed with a small stone on the paper, in pencil so faint I thought it might be shadow first. Someone had drawn a little box with a square below it and a line between, like a child's diagram. It took me until my second coffee to realize it was an elevator stacked under a door. I began to hear the pattern in places it couldn't be. Bus brakes, wing beats under eaves, the soft, percussive gossip of the bar's ice machine. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. The world is a rhythm and doesn't mind lending itself to an idea that wants it. I resolved not to go back for a week and made it 2 days. The alley had chosen a new geometry. The walls bowed in towards each other a fraction near the middle, enough to make you breathe shallower. The doors were back in their green, even numbers left. Odd right had won a smear in the paint, had the shape of my hand if I'd dragged it while standing on the wrong side of the panel. At 2, a hair caught in the seam, long and pale and perfectly straight. At 4, I smelled the sea in winter. At 5, I put my fingers to the number and felt the tremor of someone about to knock. I didn't say hello. I stepped back and knocked first, soft knuckles against the brass. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. The way you shorten your name into something that fits through a gap. The answer came from below, not from behind the door. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. A fraction late, as always. The gap between our beats felt like the space between a question and a lie. "I can't help you," I said, and didn't know which side of the sentence was true. That might have been the end of part 1 if I were telling this like a story wants to be told, with an arc that obeys. But nights in that part of the city do not obey arcs. They sag in the middle and forget their 3rd act. So the real end of that first part came 2 evenings later when I turned into the alley and found only brick. Not wall brick, book brick. Uniform, new, the color of a false tooth. Mortar lines too white and straight. The air was cooler, permanently. Kind to breath. The patch had been swallowed. The doors had never happened. I stood and did the impolite thing. Pressed my ear to the wall in public, where anyone could pass and decide my day for me. It sounded like brick should, the nearest surface of the world, uninterested. I lifted my head and, without deciding to, tapped my thigh with the pattern. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. Embarrassing, like saying a nickname after the friend has left the room. The answer came not a sound, but a sensation, rising through the soles of my feet. A faint thud settled itself into my bones, late and polite and certain. I leaned in again, and this time heard a single word, my voice, late and thinner, like the alley's old trick. "Okay," it said from behind the brick, exactly the way I say it when I want to mean, I'm not okay, but I want the conversation to go on. I left another coffee on the dry line. The rain was out there on the pavement, busy at its job. The cup was gone by morning, and in its place lay the cheap chime with a new battery in it, taped shut like a gift. On the tape, in blue pen, a little too. I told myself I would take the long way from then on, because respecting a place can be love or fear, or the same thing with different coat buttons. For a week I did. I walked where buses hissed and teenagers rehearsed being ghosts of themselves in the backs of cleaned shop windows. I slept better. The rhythm softened, became a thing my hands did to tables without involving me. Then, one night, I woke to the sound of my own front door, making the smallest noise a door can make without being opened. The flex and sigh of wood remembering it is a tree. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. I held my breath and counted the space until the late answer. It came, patient as ever, from somewhere beyond where a floor should end. That is the thing I want to tell right before the story narrows. The alley will be brick when you take someone to see it. You will knock, and your companion will smile, because you have given them a thing they can protect themselves against, with mockery. You will not convert anyone. This is not about belief. It is about geometry, choosing to remember you specifically. On the edge where wet stops, you will feel a change in the temperature of the air when your name enters a space it shouldn't be able to. On the evening that begins everything that comes next, I found a card leaning against my door at home. Plain, white, the kind you buy for cheap invitations. No writing inside. On the front, a pencil rubbing of brick. The texture was exact. My alley's new tooth-colored face. In the lower right corner, faint, almost an apology. The blue inked number 3. I stood in my kitchen with the card propped against the kettle and drank water like it was medicine. The rain began again outside in the short, wholehearted way it does when the weather has made up its mind. I put my shoes on and walked out into it, leaving my door on the catch without meaning to. My steps took me to St. Olaf's by routes I could not afterward write down. The city peeled back like labels from jars. The alley was where it had always been and had never been. The brick looked wet, but felt dry. I stood with my palm against it for a count of 6, and then knocked the pattern lightly with the side of my fist. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. The answer came from my left rather than straight ahead, closer than it had ever sounded, as if the corridor that curves under the world had decided to curl directly beneath my shoes. "Okay," said my voice from inside me, but late. "Okay," I said back, not to agree, but to mark the place where agreement might one day be possible. The brick had a hairline seam now, almost imperceptible, running waist-high along the length like a smile that didn't want to be responsible for anything that would come with it. I didn't have tools or a plan, and this is not a story about men who knock down walls because their grandfathers left them with forearms and confidence. It is about people who work late and keep their heads down and learn where the shortcuts go. The seam hummed beneath my fingertips, a small, high sound the way a glass sings when you circle the rim with a wet finger. From farther back in the alley, a faint, unlit breath moved, careful, a warm current that smelled of ink and damp and time. I put my head to the wall and spoke the softest, unhelpful sentence I own. "If you can hear me, I can hear you." The answer came with a gentleness I have never earned in my life. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. printed through the brick into bone and breath. Then silence placed between us with care, like a blanket between two sleeping brothers. That is where part one ends, though not because the story or the place asked it to. It ends because there is a point before you open a thing where it is still possible to be a person who has not opened it, and you can say you will go home and sleep and be new in the morning. You can call the council or a priest or Jenny and explain only the parts that make you sound practical. You can believe there is an honest day coming. You can stand under a sky that holds its rain at the line and count your heartbeats until they learn you again. You can be, for one more night, someone who takes the long way and arrives 7 minutes later with a story shaped like a lid, still shut. The card with the graphite rubbing sat propped against my kettle like a polite threat. The number 3 in the corner had been written as if the hand that did it didn't want to leave a dent in the world. I carried the card with me to the window and watched the rain pick up, the kind that elastic bands the city into small separate rooms. A bus pushed water to the curb. Somewhere a motorbike muttered its way under an awning. I put the card in my jacket pocket because leaving it felt like leaving a conversation that had decided not to end. I don't own tools, not in the way people who fix things mean tools. I have a butter knife that has done worse work than butter, a flathead screwdriver that came with a bookshelf I never assembled, and a torch that I keep in the drawer with the takeaway menus, because the drawer asks for something useful to justify its existence. I put those in the same pocket as the card and went out. The air on St. Olaf's had the kind of cold that dries a throat. The alley mouth looked like it had been washed, the brick too clean, the mortar a white that never happens by accident. I stood just inside the lip where the wet stopped and tried to feel foolish enough to go home. It didn't take. I put my palm to the wall and felt the high hum again, faint enough I could have called it imagination if I had wanted a smaller evening. The seam sat waist-high, hairline, running the length like a smile you keep to yourself. I knocked the rhythm because ritual helps. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. The answer lifted out of the brick late, then settled into my bones as if it preferred me to air. My hands felt clumsy. I wedged the flathead into the seam and levered as gently as I knew how to be. The screwdriver slid and kissed my knuckles. I tried again at another point and felt something give, not with drama, just with the quiet decision of old paint giving up its lie. The seam widened a hair's width. Warm air slid across my fingers, not a rush, a breath. Ink, paste, wet paper. Time. I put my ear to the opening and heard what I had always heard. Not words, not even whispers, but the mechanics of a place that isn't ready to tell you what it keeps. Air moving the way air moves when it decides which way it wants to move for a very long time. I dug the butter knife in beside the screwdriver and pried. A flake of mortar lifted, then another. It was work at the scale of confessions. Tiny, tiring, incremental. I checked the street over my shoulder like a thief who wants a witness to tell the story later. No one. The city had stepped to the other side of the room to give us privacy. After 10 minutes, I had a slit, long as my forearm and not much wider than my thumb. The warm air came steady now, a slow exhale. I turned on the torch and fed the beam into the gap. The light showed me dust that moved like water, motes rising on a convection you could feel, but not see the source of. And beyond the dust, a dark that looked like it could hold shape if it liked you. A line of metal ran inside, parallel to the seam. I realized I was looking at a door on the other side of a wall, that had been built in front of it. Door above, elevator below, the childish diagram said. I slid the torch face along the seam and felt the lens catch, then pass over a countersunk screw head. And another, and another. They had been painted and then bricked over, as if someone had decided to make the story a little thicker. I didn't think I would get the screws out with a flathead and a butter knife. I tried anyway and stripped one enough to feel the futility like a slap. I leaned my forehead against the brick and said the sentence I seemed to own. If you can hear me, I can hear you. The knock came back politely on the other side. Slow, fast, slow. And then a new thing. A scratch, not fingernails, metal. A sound like someone dragging a key along a surface to show you where it is. Where are you? I whispered, trying not to hate myself for the question. The scratch moved along the inside, mapping the height of the hidden door behind the brick. It stopped where a handle would be if this were a sensible door. I put my hand to the brick at that spot, and the warmth gathered under my palm. Circular, as if an old thing with a round face had been waiting. I went home for string. That is one of those sentences you don't plan to write about your life. I took a length of thick twine we keep at the bar for tying bin bags when the ties tear, and I stuffed it in my coat. Back at the alley, I tied one end around the drain pipe at the mouth and the other around my wrist. I don't know what I thought would happen if I were pulled. I don't weigh much, and a pipe is a pipe. It made me feel connected to the outside in a way that phones and keys do not. I pried until my hands shook and my breath made fog on the brick. A piece the size of a paperback finally dropped out into my lap, and the warm air no longer had to flatten itself to make it through. The dark behind was close, present. I fed my arm in past the slit up to the elbow. My skin came out dusty and shining with a film of something that smelled like a library. S-basement. I widened the hole further, the screwdriver singing in short protests, the butter knife bending in a way that felt sympathetic. Bit by bit, the bricked-over face of the hidden door revealed itself. Metal painted brown once, and then the paint scrubbed away by time and hands. A round plate where a lock had been screws, like eyes watching me try. The chime my tea brought home appeared on the pavement beside me with a small sound I felt in my teeth, more than heard. I hadn't seen it arrive. It sat with its magnet beside it, taped shut again, with a new sliver of blue ink along the edge. A tiny 4. I'm not ready, I said to the door, to the brick, to my own hands, and felt the stupid honesty of it salt my tongue. Back at mine, I washed gray paste down the sink and watched a ghost of it trace the porcelain. I made coffee I didn't drink. I sat with my phone and typed out St. Olaf's Road Underground and erased it, and then Rennig Missing Boy Alley Council bricked, and erased that because mixing stories was worse than asking for help. I found nothing, which is not the same as finding out there's nothing to find. The next day I bought a proper set of drivers from a hardware place where the owner looked like he had defeated every screw he ever met and would forgive me for my enthusiasm. I bought a pry bar that could be passed off as a long paperweight if you wanted to pretend you weren't going to use it on a wall. I added a small headlamp because holding a torch in your teeth is a young man's affectation, and my dentist would like me to be sensible. I told myself I would wait until night. I lasted until late afternoon. The alley held its dryness like a rule. I put the headlamp on and felt ridiculous, until I remembered that ridiculous is what you feel just before you discover you should have felt careful. The drivers bit the old screws with a satisfaction that felt like winning at a board game that had been missing a piece for years. They turned. One squealed, then moved. Another gave in fearful increments. Under each, the metal plate of the door quivered slightly. When the last screw eased out, the plate dropped with a small, polite clank inside the wall. The seam was a line again, and the line was a promise. I slid the pry bar into the hole I'd made and leaned my weight. Brick didn't crumble the way it does in films. It resisted with the steady patience of something that knows you will fail before it will. The bar got me a quarter inch, then a half, and then a crack like a knuckle finally being allowed to speak. The door behind did not open outward. It sank a few millimeters, as if settling in its frame. Warm air came properly then, not a breath, a tide. Something touched the inside of the slit, not a hand. A space where a hand could be, pressing back with the deliberateness of someone showing. They understand the idea of pressure. I pushed. It pushed. Metal rasped. Brick murmured. The gap widened enough to fit my arm to the shoulder. I fed the headlamp beam through and saw at last not metaphor, but geometry. A narrow landing immediately beyond, then a short flight of concrete steps going down, then a corridor that curved left out of sight. The paint on the opposite wall had once been cream, and now was the color of paper kept in a drawer and shown only at funerals. The air rose and fell on my face. Beneath the human smells, glue, ink, was another note, mineral and shut in, the breath of earth that has been allowed to keep secrets too long. I slid through. It took more wriggle than grace. I gritted my teeth against a brick that did not care about my jacket. The twine tugged at my wrist as if to say, "You are a bright idiot, and I am proud of you." I landed on the narrow inside landing with a soft, unheroic grunt and stood in a world that had been waiting with its lights off. Sound behaves differently underground. Your breath belongs to more than you, and footsteps wear your shoes ahead of you to try out what your weight will do. I kept my hand on the wall, because having a hand on a wall is one of the oldest things a person can do to remind themselves they're not floating. The corridor was barely wider than my shoulders, and it vanished left in a curve that felt familiar. The headlamp showed me a faint line at shin height, where a mop had gone for years, until it was told not to anymore. Between my feet, at the top of the stair, lay a paper square, cheap, the edges deckled, folded once. I picked it up and had to resist the urge to put it back unfolded, as if I had disrespected something. Inside, in pencil again, the little diagram had been updated. Door, line, box, then below, another box, then another line curving left. On the back, a drawn hand tapping a rhythm. 3 dots, a gap, 1 dot, a gap, 2 dots. "I'm in," I told the space, quietly enough to pretend I was speaking only to myself. The knocks happened, not under me now, but ahead, deep in the curve. 3 slow. A pause. 1 fast, like a small apology. 2 slow, as if to say, "I waited. I went." The twine paid out behind me with the idiot optimism of a set of keys left near the edge of a table. The corridor's paint lifted under my fingers in long strips like skin after too much sun. I passed a door where there should not have been room for one, and there was none. Just an outline, painted over, like a door had decided to stop being itself. The curve turned into another curve, and the world forgot right angles. I counted my steps because I didn't know what else to count. 20 to the next landmark. which was a low metal grill at ankle height, humming with the small throatiness of air. 35 to a bend, I could not see around, but felt arrived by the way the sound of my feet changed. The headlamp caught brass, small square plates screwed into the wall at shoulder height, one every 3 or 4 paces. The first had no number, only the scratch of something once written and then polished out by fingers. The second said 1, the third said 3, the fourth 5. My mouth tasted of anticipations. The plates on the opposite wall appeared now too, staggered. 2, 4, 6, 8. I did not touch them. I had learned that touching is a language it prefers you to be fluent in before you speak. At the 39th step, my phone buzzed once in my pocket with the useless bravery of a device that thinks it can make a place let it in. No signal. The time on the lock screen said 1812, which made no sense. I had left the flat a little after 4, the alley not long after. The headlamp's cone showed a scratchy line on the paint at shoulder height, the kind a person makes by moving with a key extended down a hall. I lined my hand against it and found the height matched mine too well to be a coincidence I wanted. I passed an alcove wide enough to pretend it had once been for a fire extinguisher, and found only the rust ghost of brackets. On the floor beneath, marks, 2 long scuffs, as if a heavy thing with 2 small feet had been dragged sideways until it stopped wanting to be there. My headlamp flickered because it wanted attention, not because the battery had gone. I gave it none. The corridor ended without ending. It poured itself into a square landing with a low ceiling and another door face, brown paint, brass number plate that had been removed and left 4 little holes like mouse eyes. I knocked because the idea of trying the handle first felt rude. 3 slow, a pause I would one day recognize as the length of someone filling lungs. 1 fast, 2 slow. Then, something I had not heard before, a knock out of time, a small, uncertain tap near the bottom, as if a child had tried to learn the tune and lost a beat. I can try, I said. It is a stupid thing to promise a wall. The handle turned a 1/4 inch and met a second handle turning from the other side. I felt it through the metal. That hesitant half-turn mirrored. I withdrew my hand so gently I could pretend I hadn't had it there at all. The knock again. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. The late tap at the end like a foot that wanted not to be left out. "Thomas," said a voice. It said my name the way you say a name you have read many times and now must hear. It was my voice, late, softer, without the bit that makes it mine. "Thomas," it said again behind the door, and the late part was the part that scraped. "Tell me what you are," I said, because who presumes too much? The answer came as a draft pressed through the seam around my ankles, warm, sharp with ink, and something that was not exactly damp, but remembered it. Then words again, shaped over the draft, as if the breath that made them came first. "Not ready," it said. "Me then." My voice, the words I had used to the brick. "Not ready." Then low, almost a confession. "Stay." I pressed my ear to the door and heard footsteps, slow, bare, the sound that skin makes on sealed concrete. They moved away the way a person moves away when they want you to follow, but not yet. The headlamp breathed along the paint and showed me a smear down low where hands had pressed. 4 fingers again, no ring finger, no thumb, the same height as the smeared paint upstairs. I surprised myself by wanting to cry, not from fear, but from recognition. The boy in the story Jenny had half told me, then dismissed as a story she did not want to carry. "I can't leave you," I said. and hated the shape of the sentence as it left. The corridor exhaled a threat of cold then, proof that the warm is companions. I stood on the small landing and allowed myself to consider turning around and going home, climbing out of the slit onto the alley as dry edge, leaving the pry bar on the floor as if I'd simply set down a thought. I pictured boiling the kettle, texting no one, sleeping for once. What I did instead was unclip the twine from my wrist and tie it to the handle on my side of the door. A part of me wanted the line between us to be undeniable. Another part of me knew a line is a leash and hated what that might mean. I pulled the handle and felt the other pull with me, tentative as the first dance at a school disco. The door moved a fraction, then stalled. From the far side, a hand, or the space where a hand could be, brushed the edge, searching for the exact angle. We tried again. Another fraction. The air sharpened. The smell thickened. Far behind me in the curve, something knocked once. A warning or a joke. On 3, I said, to a thing that knew numbers. We pulled on 3 and the door agreed to become more open than closed. A band of deeper dark slid in like a tongue. I wedged the pry bar in and shouldered the gap and felt paint give under my shirt. The door coughed a whisper of long-kept dust. It stopped against a limiter that had survived smarter men than me. We had space for my shoulders and a breath. Not a dignified way through, but a way. I turned sideways and slid. The room was not a room. It was another corridor that thought of itself as a room for a while. A wider belly in the curve, with a ceiling that had once had tiles and now had a grid. My headlamp picked out an old metal chair on its side, the back bent, the legs splayed. Beside it sat a paper cup fossilized into the floor by time, and something spilled that had left a halo like a wound. On the far wall, 3 brass plates, unnumbered, stacked at different heights. Beneath the lowest, scratched into the paint with a blunt thing, a name, Lee. The E's had been done with a heavy hand. Below that, an attempt at a drawing. Rectangle, rectangle, line, curve. The same diagram as on the card. The child S elevator, repeated by someone who had had to use it too often to keep it innocent. Lee, I said to the walls. The scrape ahead of me was not heavy. It had the size of a person who at some point had been told to tread quietly and had listened. When I took 1 step forward, the scrape took 1 step back. The rhythm found me and fitted itself around me the way the city's larger rhythms do. Trains, street lamps timing their relays, the night cleaning machines that sigh outside shops. I reached the first unnumbered plate and put my fingers near it without touching. Heat lived there, brief, as if a hand had only recently been taken away. A soft knock came from behind me. Not the door, not the corridor. From the wall where the headlamp showed nothing but the blank paint. I turned and the knock came again, and my own late breath sounded like someone else sneaking up my throat. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. Then, after a small, aching pause, 3 more slow, like a stuttered encore. Are you alone? I asked. It was a question that didn't want the honesty it asked for. Okay, said my voice. From above me this time, late, too light. Okay. The twine tugged my wrist. I turned to find it had wrapped itself once around the chair leg. A flourish that made no sense, unless something had tried to use it to find the way I had come. The headlamp picked out another set of scratches lower down, child height. The same 4-finger tracks I had seen upstairs, angled as if someone had leaned against the paint, to rest or to root in place. I knelt and pressed my palm beside them in an idiot solidarity and felt the paint cool under my hand, then warm as if a cheek had pressed the other side of the wall in answer. "Lee," I said again, almost into the seam. The reply came as a single knock, then the clumsy little aftertap. "Learning. I should have gone back then. I know that now." The scene offered me a human story. Boy, bricked corridors, a council decision, and a supernatural one. Voices broken over time, doors learning to breathe. That is where a person who wants to keep being a person steps back over the threshold and becomes someone who tells stories. I don't think I wanted to be a person who only tells stories, or I wanted to know what part of this one had borrowed my voice to make itself more persuasive. The corridor curved left because it always did, and I followed it. The plates appeared regular at first. Then their spacing changed the way footsteps change when someone starts to hurry. The numbers returned, 10, 12, 14, skipping odd by choice. I looked for 9 and didn't find it. I wanted to laugh at the pettiness of that want, but laughter is a habit best kept for people. At the next landing, a new smell arrived. Not ink, not damp paper. Something electrical at the edge of burning. A transformer deciding what it wants to be when it isn't used. The door here had been forced once, long ago, and then forced back into the idea of a door by someone with a heavy hammer and a want to be done. It had no handle. The seam sucked at my breath. A smear of something darker lived at shoulder height that was too old to be anything but a shadow of a thing that had long since become part of the wall's story. Behind me, 3 slow. In front of me, 1 fast. At my feet, 2 slow like a heartbeat. Somebody wants you to hear to prove they're alive. The rhythm triangulated me like a joke with too many punchlines. I closed my eyes and counted to 7, because 7 is a number that makes the mouth work and the mind stop. When I opened them, the chair had moved. Hand's width, no more. Its legs sat now directly on the twine, pinning it lightly to the floor. The line back to the alley mouth was there, but not as an intention, as a possession. "Okay," said my voice from the corridor's curve. Late, and then softer, as if not wanting to be overheard by itself. "Stay." I looked back the way I had come. The line I had chalked on the inside of my head about bravery and stupidity moved 5 paces forward without telling me. I paid out twine until it was slack again and tied a second knot round my wrist, tight enough to feel the pulse I kept pretending I wasn't listening to. The headlamp painted the next length of corridor, the soft color of old paper. The plates on the wall read 16, 18, 20. The numbers were going up as if someone wanted to take me somewhere they could count to out loud. Somewhere beyond the next bend, I heard the hiss of a lift that does not exist above ground, not the ding people think they remember. The breath of cables, the logic of counterweight, the heavy cordiality of a machine that has been asked to be gentle. The sound made the hair at the back of my neck bifurcate. I walked toward it because it is hard not to follow a thing you have heard in your sleep for weeks, even before you knew you would. When the corridor opened, it did so in a way that told me it had never been meant to be looked at. A square room with a metal gate stood set into the far wall. The gate had vertical bars, an old pattern, and a concertina fold that made it look like it would sing if taught. Above it, in enamel, a sign, down. To the right, a dead button. To the left, a hole where another button had once been. In the floor, a seam that matched the one upstairs. My headlamp glinted off scratches carved into the gate at each bar's waist. Little measurements. child's growth chart. If the child had stood here and made marks to prove how time worked, while the world around them had decided it didn't. On the gate, low down where only a kneeling person or a small one would write, 3 letters again. Lee, the second E had been gone over so often, it had eaten into the metal like a mouth. "All right," I said. "To the gate, to the boy, to the breathing place, to my own late voice waiting somewhere to repeat me wrong. All right." Behind me, carefully, the chair settled itself an inch farther onto the twine. The line home tightened against my wrist, and then slackened without moving the chair. Something had learned the trick of sharing. The gate exhaled. The room listened. I pressed my fingers to the seam in the floor and felt heat rise like a promise trying to be a threat. The dead button reflected my headlamp back at me and made my face a washed ghost. I raised my hand to the place where the other button had been and tapped at the pattern on the wall, soft so as not to teach the room too much at once. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. From inside the shaft, late and breath-shaped and mine, came the answer, and then another noise, new, a small, delighted sound that pushed air through a throat not quite big enough for it. A little laugh, then the lightest knock you can make and have it still be a knock at all. "Lee," I said, and felt the room lean in to hear what I would say next. The laugh was what undid me. Not the echo, not the late version of my voice that had become a wrong ID. Started to recognize the way you recognize an old injury when it rains. The laugh was small and involuntary, the kind a child makes when a secret door works exactly how they hoped, and I felt my mouth open before my sense could tell me to close it. "Lee," I said to the gate. The reply came in pieces. The first piece was warmth through the seam in the floor, like someone cupping a match beneath my palm from inside the shaft. The second piece was the rhythm, tapped on metal from below with cautious confidence. 3 slow, a little pause, 1 fast, a bigger pause, 2 slow. The last piece was air, moving upwards, the way breath does when it has decided to carry words on it, but doesn't know which ones yet. The chair behind me settled another inch onto the twine. Not a threat, a presence practicing the grammar of being here. I looked down the seam and spoke to a place that couldn't see my face. "Can you come up?" The shaft answered with an old elevator's mechanics, a cable's careful sigh, the heavy throat of counterweight, the apology of guides that haven't been touched in years. The gate quivered against my fingers as if it remembered opening and had chosen to be modest about it. I pressed my ear to the bars and heard the lower gate somewhere below scrape in a way that was almost polite, then catch on a snag and stop. The laugh again, smaller now, embarrassed. Then that clumsy little extra tap that had started turning up at the end of the pattern, the one that felt like a child insisting there's still something left to say. I tried the concertina fold. It moved a finger S width, and then met the kind of resistance you get from something held shut by a rule rather than a lock. "All right," I said, mostly to the part of me that was trying to negotiate with the superstition. "I'm going to give you line." I unthreaded the twine from my wrist and tied a loop around one of the bars at waist height, then passed the rest through, letting it snake down into the dark. It went freely at first, then tugged as if it had found somebody's hand. I waited. A small pull came from below, cautious, then 2 more like learning a handshake. "You've got it," I said. The pull from below didn't tug back greedily, the way panic does. It held just enough tension to make the line meaningful, just enough to carry a message up. Here, and here, and here. I leaned my forehead against the gate and tried to match my breathing to the elevator. This memory of movement somewhere inside that breath, shaped with more weight than we use on up here. A whisper rose. Okay. It wasn't mine this time. Still late, but the late belonged to a mouth that had gone dry saying the same words to itself for a very long time. Tell me what's down there, I said, knowing full well that the answer I wanted wasn't the answer that would come. Down, the whisper said, with a careful seriousness. I almost laughed. I didn't. The corridor didn't like laughter unless it was the small accidents. It sent things away that laughed too loudly. The headlamp flickered again, quickly. Not enough to scare, enough to remind. I adjusted the elastic and caught the edges of 3 more details around the gate that I hadn't noticed when all my attention belonged to one place. First, to the left of the gate, at knee height, a rectangle where paint had been sanded clean to bare metal, postage stamp small. In the center of the bare metal, 5 thin etchings, one above the other, not quite evenly spaced. Tally marks, 4 straight verticals cut with something sharper than a nail, then a diagonal line through them both times, twice over. 10. Second, under the enamel down sign, tiny letters someone had tried to polish off, but left ghosts of anyway. Serve. Service. Third, a smear at shoulder height, both sides, as if hands had been pressed there too long, while someone leaned their ear to listen for the lift. Do you want me to come down? I asked the kind of question people ask when they have already decided, and the shaft listened like it was older than hearing and would reserve judgment until it had to. The line tugged twice. Not yes, exactly. Agreement to a proposition. I looked back along the corridor toward the slit in the wall that led to the alley. It wasn't far. That was one of the tricks of the place. It kept itself near even when it wanted to be far. The chair sat with its bent back to me like a tired animal, the twine trapped gently under a leg. My line, which had seemed like a good idea upstairs, had become a shared asset. I tightened the knot around the bar and tested it with my weight until the metal said, "This is as much help as I can offer without becoming a problem." The concertina gate accepted my hands now in a way it hadn't on first try. The folds slid. A bar squealed her. Inside, a second gate, wire mesh, the sort with a lazy diamond pattern. Through it, black that was not absence but substance. As I opened the outer gate, the room took my noise and turned it into its own, in a way that had nothing to do with echo and everything to do with permission. I slid the inner gate too, and the air reached for me with a softness that made my eyes sting. The car waited. That was the word my brain chose. Car, like in old buildings and films. They show late at night after the adverts. The floor was the same painted steel as the doors, worn to honest metal where feet had stood. A waist-height rail ran around 3 sides, smooth with the kind of polish only skin can give. An enamel plate, square and true, above the rail. Max 4 persons. Someone had scratched the 4 into a 1, then back into a 4. On the panel where buttons might once have been, a single switch remained. A brass lever in a slot with 2 positions, up and down. The lever sat dead center like a tongue that couldn't decide a word. Below the slot, a tiny plate with engraved letters in that neat municipal font. Manual hold. I didn't touch the lever. I set 1 foot on the threshold of the car, the way you do when you mean to board a train, but wanted to change its mind for you. The floor did not move. The smell did, though. It lifted off the metal like a memory. Glue, ink, the sharp singe of old windings, the grim patience of trapped air. I put my other foot inside, the twine side on the gate bars, and settled itself more comfortably, making a small sound like a pet, making a nest of a shirt you didn't know you'd left where it could reach. "Show me," I said. The lever didn't move. The car moved anyway, quietly, with the self-respect of an old thing that has decided to remain dignified in front of company. The up room, the square with the gate and the enamel sign, and the chair and the line, rose very slightly without rising at all, and the dark rose more. It is a strange feeling to descend without there being the usual theater of descent. No jolt, no complaint of cable, no squeak of guide wheels, only warmth and the suggestion that you are being exchanged between layers. I counted because I am someone who counts when trains go into tunnels. 7 slow breaths, 1 quick, 2 slow. I don't know if I counted because of the rhythm, or if the rhythm used my breath to keep itself. The car slid to a halt, with the sort of certainty that makes you want to apologize for having been skeptical. Through the mesh, another gate waited. On its enamel plate, Level B, the paint here had suffered less weather. The letters gleamed. "Okay," came up to me from outside, late again but nearer, with an eagerness it couldn't quite hide. "I'm going to open," I said. I slid the inner gate, then the outer, and stepped into a space that had been someone's idea of safe. Level B was wider than the corridor upstairs, and lower. The ceiling brushed my hair in a way that had me ducking without needing to. The walls had been opted into cream once, then regretted it and dulled to bone. Along the left ran a long window with the wire glass squares you see in school doors, each pane milky from decades of room-side condensation. Behind the glass, what had once been an office or a control room watched me with the interest of an old dog who knows all the tricks and cannot be bothered to perform them. A desk faced the glass inside, very near, as if whoever sat there had wanted to be seen. On the desk, a microphone angled toward the window, dormant. Beside the desk, on the floor, a thermos, old green, dented. The cup that makes the lid was missing. On the wall above the desk, a framed notice had fallen within its frame and lay cockeyed against the glass. The title, backwards through the wire mesh pattern, read, "Safety Instructions." The rest of the words had become wallpaper. The corridor to the right wore numbers, brass plates again at shoulder height, 21, 23, 25, 27. The same odd arithmetic. The left-hand wall had 22, 24, 26. The numbers felt like they had a plan, and the plan had been content with itself long enough to become a religion. The knock came from ahead, not behind anymore, and the headlamp lit dust moving through a shape that could have been the air of a boy. "Here," said the voice, not mine, not late. The word was so small and so normal that I had to lean my hand on the wall to keep the story from lifting me off my feet. "I hear you," I said, and hated the cliché even as I said it, and meant it too much for it to matter. He didn't run to me. That's the part I think about later, more than the mechanical mercy under the city, more than the brick pretending to be honest. If you've waited forever, you learn to make other people come the last meters. I followed the sound down the numbered hall, past doors that were only doors in the way a boarded shop window is a window, the suggestion of a handle, the absence of a keyway. At 25, a tiny length of twine looked like an eyelash against the paint. tied into a knot so careful it had embarrassed itself into being small. At 27, 4 fingerprints low on the wall that were older than any child I could name and newer than paint should admit. Lee, I said again, at 29, and the boy was there, not in the ordinary way that boys are, but in the way places can learn to accommodate a shape for a while. The headlamp scattered off the dust at precisely the outline a body leaves when it moves away from a wall, and within that outline the air was warmer by a degree. The little laugh came again, and this time it was closer to a sob, the kind kids make in the 3rd hour of a long car ride when they dream a toy has fallen under the seat and wake too properly to know if it has. Can you? I began, and could not find verbs that weren't rude. Can you step? Here, I patted the wall at my side like a man trying to teach a dog to heel. The air wavered once, and then was where I patted. My headlamp brushed across wire glass and found my own reflection cheapened by the mesh. Beside my reflection, lower, a fog oval formed on the pane as if a mouth had tried to see itself. The oval stayed for 2 counts of the rhythm, and then was gone. Did they brick you in? I asked, hating the question, as soon as I heard it with my own ears. The boy's answer came in economy. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock. Then, after a long, empty hold, a single tap offbeat. He had taught himself not to say yes in a place where the world would have you learn to say yes to too much. What happens if we go down? The answer was laughter again, tempered by caution now. I had not offered the right trade. People who live in corridors do not ask for more corridor. I saw myself as the city's worst habit. The man who tells the child in the cellar that all you have to do is be braver and it will be fine, then uses the child's bravery as proof. I want to take you up, I said. Up is better than down. The corridor listened. The lift car breathed. From somewhere far above, like a muscle remembering how to tremble, the tripwire tremolo of the street's buses found the metal and made it hum agreeably. Up, said the voice in a whisper that had learned the shape of bedsheets first. Up, he said again, and made his small after tap like a hand on a knee. We moved back toward the car together, the boy S-shape as a change in temperature at my shoulder, the old office staring at us from behind wire, like a witness who has long ago stopped going to court. The gate accepted me. The car accepted me. The air accepted what it had already chosen. The boy did not step into the car. He wavered near it, like the slick of warm air that swirls into a room when a door opens onto summer, and then stops, shy at the threshold. Come on, I said lightly, doing the voice you do for cats and for people on ledges. Nothing fancy. It's not going to make a fuss. Okay, said my voice, but not mine, low down, as if spoken by someone sitting cross-legged on the car floor. Word had that late drag again, but the late belonged to weight, not to tape. The twine at the gate bars lifted and drooped, as if something were remembering to breathe through a straw. I held out my hand to air, and the air warmed my palm in answer. It is a mad sentence to write, but there it is. My hand felt full the way it does when you pass it through the place where another hand just was. I led the warmth 2 steps onto the car. The rail hummed, the way metal hums when somebody touches it without wanting to admit they needed to. Good, I said, ridiculous, and meant it more seriously than anything I had said out loud in months. The gates slid. The lever, all by itself, considered something, and then moved a degree toward UP. The car rose with that same modest certainty. We breathed together. I counted 7 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow. I don't know if he listened to my count, or if I listened to his. When the car leveled, it did so with a love for precision that made my throat hurt. The mesh showed me the top gate. Wire diamonds lined up with wire diamonds. The enamel plate reading level A, as if A had always been a small miracle. I slit the gates and stepped out. The chair sat where it had twine under one leg and raised itself a finger's width as if to meet an old friend's eyes. The room was as I had left it, except it was not. That is how rightness feels when a place has been wrong long enough. You can smell a difference only if you have learned too much about the wrong. "Here," said the voice, small, happy, surprised to find itself aloud. "Here," I said back, stupidly, and I don't regret it. He did not step out of the car. A warm shape hovered at the threshold and made the lightest noise. Not laughter, not fear, something between. I understood it in my body before my mind thought the thought. This was as far as he had been allowed last time. The place where up ends and up refuses to be sanctuary. The drawn line between being in a machine that obeys you and being in a corridor that obeys its own idea. "It's all right," I said, hating how quickly I had become the man who says it. It's all right, because he needs it to be. We're going to go higher. There's an alley. There's air that hasn't been through the same room 1,000 times. I didn't mention people. He hadn't asked for people. He had learned enough about people. "Up," he repeated, and this time the word held something like appetite. He crossed the threshold into the level A room, so carefully I could have cried for that too. The temperature of the square shifted, the way it does when a radiator finally remembers its job, then settled. The wire glass in the dead office window breathed out a film and then dried again. The enamel down sign ticked lightly, as if it had survived an argument. "Nearly there," I said. We were not nearly there. There were stairs. There was a slit in a wall I had made with a butter knife and hope. There was a dry line in an alley where rain had decided to be someone else. S problem. There was the city. We moved together toward the corridor, back to the slit. The twine around my wrist tightened, and then let go. Tightened, and let go. The chair shifted its weight off the line with a delayed courtesy, and allowed the loop to slip free. The boy, S warmth, pressed at my left hand, as if hands were a thing we could still do honestly. My headlamp pooled our light ahead, small and insufficient and stubborn. At the first corner, the corridor did something I will not forgive. It shortened, not to save us, to test. The plates that had read 20, 18, 16 before the square now read 18, 16, 14. I stopped. He stopped. "No," I said aloud to Brick. "No." The corridor paid me the compliment of obeying in a way that made mockery of obedience. The numbers did not change back. The air did not shift to show me it cared. The warmth at my hand didn't get scared. It got tired. I felt that like a hand closing around my forearm in a crowded platform. Not panic. A request not to be an additional problem. "We'll go together," I told him, "even if it tries things." He made the little after tap. The one I had learned meant not agreement, not doubt, something like, "I am here to the extent that here is allowed." We reached the second corner. My chalk line, drawn when daylight had too much faith in itself, had smudged to almost nothing along the wall. I put my thumb into what remained like someone kissing a saint's toe in a city that does saints differently. The air cooled. Behind us, 3 slow knocks sounded from wrong places. Floor, then wall, then that empty office window. The rhythm had learned to be fancy. "Don't show off," I said. "It doesn't suit you." The corridor didn't mind being insulted. That was almost worse. We reached the landing where the inside door had met my handle and learned to work with me. It stood open a patient inch exactly as I had left it. Beyond it, the slit in the wall showed a different kind of black, alley black, city black, the sort of black that gets punctured 30,000 times a second, and each puncture matters to somebody. I turned sideways and slid through. My jacket caught at the hip and tore in the soft rib that sounds like the end of a thought. I came out into the dry line. "All right," I said, and then, because I had to, "Come on." There was a pause. It wasn't the long, hopeless pause of a thing that wants to say no. It was the pause of a child at the lip of a pool on the first day of summer, who knows it will be cold and knows being cold is part of the job. The warm shape gathered itself and came to the slit. The seam breathed. The brick made the sound brick makes when it intends to complain to the council. The boy pressed through the gap. For an instant I thought I saw him. A foot, bare, not ghostly, real, in the way the world is real when it has decided to be cruel and honest at the same time. The sole was gray, with the polish of concrete floors. The little toe bent under, as if it had taught itself to get out of the way. Then the warm shape was beside me in the alley, and the alley did something I had not predicted. It rained, just inside, a fine film of rain that belonged to the outside world, obeyed no line, and came with us those 2 steps. It beaded on the rail of the pry bar and sat on the brass number plates as if to anoint them. Then it stopped again at the mouth the way it always had. He laughed. It was a shock. Not the small laugh from the shaft, not the embarrassed one at the scraped lower gate. This was joy like tearing paper off a present, quick, unrepeatable. I felt something unclench in my chest that I had not unclenched for anyone I knew the names of. "Up," he said, and meant the sky, not the lift. "Up," I said back, and meant the same thing. We stepped to the mouth. The street was present, in the way a favorite old teacher is present when you are older and discover that you can talk to them. A bus sighed past. A woman in a hood walked under an umbrella so large it looked more like a portable tent, and swore at a puddle with the kind of good humor that means, "You live here." A man leaned out of the bakery door and shouted something in Polish at someone I could not see, and laughed at his own joke and coughed. The warm shape at my side thinned. That is the only word I have for it. Thinned the way steam thins when it decides to be air again. The after-tap came against my wrist, so light I might have imagined it. The laugh turned into a quiet that did not feel like the other quiet had felt downstairs. "Lee," I said, hope a stupid thing in my mouth. "Are you okay?" he said, and it was not late, not anymore. It was the word how I say it when there is a cue, and I forgive it because there is bread at the end. It came from beside me and also from all around me, and also from below. Then the warmth eased away like a person settling into a seat you cannot see, and decided to be air. The chime, the cheap little door chime, rang once in my coat pocket as if it had been told to mind the shop for a minute. I took it out. The tape had a new mark, a blue inked 8, neat as a teacher's tick. I stood with the chime in my palm and listened for the corridor, and heard only the bus and the bakery, and London being ordinary on purpose. I bricked the slit as best I could with what hands and money I had. That sentence sits there like a lie, but it's not. I went to the yard where the builders leave their honest leftovers and bought 6 bricks and a bag of ready mix, and said nothing, and the man took my 20 and said nothing in return. I prized the edge where my pry bar had pried and pressed new brick into old as neatly as a man with my skills can do. It wasn't pretty. It didn't need to be. The city knows how to let ugliness blend itself in if it means quiet. I left coffee at the dry line 3 nights in a row. The first morning the cup was gone, and the chime sat where it had been with the magnet on top of it, and a little blue 9 on the tape. The second morning the cup was gone and nothing was left. The third morning the cup was there, cold, with a ring of gum on the lip, like someone had tried to learn a grown-up habit and had decided against it. I did call the council. I told a man with a voice like a library that there was an unsafe seam and a bricked door, and that I was concerned about children. He told me he would raise a ticket and that someone would be in touch, and he meant it. Nobody was in touch. Weeks later, a sign appeared at the alley mouth that said, "No public right of way," and a day after that, it had been turned on its side by a hand that hated signs. I stopped leaving coffee and left sausages rolls instead, because that is what the boy would have been given by a grandmother if the world had allowed him to keep one. The rolls were always gone by morning. That means nothing. Foxes exist. The long way became a habit. It took longer than 7 minutes to relearn. I still cut the corner sometimes when the city lets me forget how close geometry can stand and still be polite. On those days, I put my palm to the brick and feel a hum deep in the wall that has no business traveling through clay. I don't knock. You don't knock at places you have asked to become quieter. Every now and then, when I'm bone tired, and some part of me thinks it will be a good idea to let my hands decide what to do, I wake to the smallest noise a door can make without being opened. Wood thinking about weather. On those nights, there is a pattern in the next room that my mind tries to decide is pipes. 3 slow, 1 fast, 2 slow, and then that little after tap like a boy who has promised to be good for exactly 1 more minute. Sometimes, when the air in my kitchen is thinner than it should be, I tap the counter back to him, not to invite, to answer. The air warms by a degree, and the cheap chime which I keep taped inside the cupboard door next to the mugs clicks its little reed, like it's clearing its throat to say, "Counted." Jenny asked me once, in the way people ask when they love you, enough to risk the part where you sound mad, whether I had been sleeping better. I said, yes, because I think the city allows you to tell some lies if you tell them kindly. She said she had heard a story about a brick job in a side street and a lad years ago, and that she didn't like the version with the priest because it made the wrong person the main character. I told her I liked the version with the boy learning to count. She said she preferred the version where someone got out. Did someone get out? She asked after a drink we hadn't planned to have. Yes, I said, and meant it. All right, she said, and gave me that look people get when they decide your particular strangeness is not the dangerous kind. All right, when it rains the way it rained that first night, the decisive thin curtain that makes the world into separate rooms, I think about the after tap, and about the laugh inside the shaft, and about the first time I pressed my ear to a patch on the floor, because I thought curiosity might make a good dog. And I count sometimes, if nobody is nearby to be made nervous by it. 7 slow breaths, 1 fast, 2 slow. Not because anything will happen if I do, because something did. Last week I found a card at my door again. The same plain white. This time, no brick rubbing, just a pencil line drawn from top edge to bottom edge, very slightly curved to the left. In the corner, the blue 10, small and satisfied, I stood with it over the bin longer than you'd think a man can stand with a piece of card over a bin and not commit. I didn't throw it away. I put it in the drawer with the torch and the screwdriver and the butter knife that believes in me. Sometimes I catch myself walking past the alley mouth and raising my hand without touching, the way you raise your hand outside a sick room, because you don't trust yourself not to go in if you push the door. On those days, I feel the city very fond of me. It has granted me a knowing and asked me to live with it, which is what love is when it doesn't have any better ideas. And sometimes, very rarely, I hear a child laugh under the noise of a bus taking a corner badly in the rain. It is small and unrepeatable and quick as tearing paper. It doesn't come from below. It doesn't come from behind brick. It comes from the sort of place where air learns to be weather, and I don't try to catch it or make it into a story. I just stand there and let it count me. Okay.